There is a terrifying moment often mistaken for depression, burnout, or failure, when the life you spent years building suddenly feels like a costume you can no longer breathe inside. Not because something catastrophic happened, but because the person you became to survive is no longer someone your soul recognizes. What if that moment, that silent suffocation, isn't the beginning of your collapse, but the first honest breath of the self you were always meant to be? Most people believe transformation arrives draped in light. The breakthrough, the win, the moment everything finally makes sense. But depth psychology reveals a far more unsettling truth. The deepest change often begins in the seasons when you feel most estranged from your own existence, when the old motivations rot from the inside, and a quiet, unexplainable voice whispers that the person you've been can no longer continue. Carl Jung didn't call this a breakdown. He recognized it as the prelude to individuation, the psyche's radical, often painful, process of shedding a false life so an authentic one can finally take root. So if lately you've felt yourself slipping away from who you used to be, losing interest in conversations that once defined you, and sensing that an invisible tectonic shift is happening beneath your everyday personality, then this video is not entertainment. It's a map. Because the darkness you might be inside right now, the confusion, the withdrawal, the internal chaos, might actually be the final gateway before your life realigns with something truer than you've ever known. Chapter 1. Persona dissolution. When the mask becomes a cage, there are quiet catastrophes that arrive without a single warning siren. No dramatic crash, no public failure. Instead, the inner architecture of who you thought you were begins to erode the way a sandbar reshapes beneath a river imperceptibly, until one morning you wake and the landscape of your identity is no longer navigable. The dissolution of the persona is exactly this subtle. It doesn't scream. It unnerves. A person can go weeks, sometimes years, performing the outward motions of a successful life, attending meetings, laughing at the right moments, maintaining the exact image that earned them acceptance, while deep in the thorax of their psyche a claustrophobic truth festers. I have become a stranger to myself. The strange horror is that on paper, nothing is wrong, yet the soul has begun to treat the familiar like an allergen, rejecting the very identity that once kept it safe. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But the brutal paradox is that most of us spend decades becoming someone the world finds easier to digest first. He called that temporary architecture the persona, the social mask sculpted by adaptation. A boy discovers his sensitivity gets him ridiculed, so he buries it beneath a performance of toughness. A young woman learns that her assertiveness brands her difficult, so she shrinks into perpetual agreeability. A man hides his exhaustion behind professional bravado because vulnerability was shamed out of him before he had the words to name it. Over time, these compromises no longer feel like choices. They ossify into identity. And that's when the silent tragedy unfolds. Not because the mask is fake, all social masks serve a purpose, but because a human being can wear one for so long that they completely forget the face behind. The terror of persona dissolution isn't loud anguish. It's the quiet, creeping sensation of alienation from your own biography. One day, the achievements that used to make your spine straighten feel hollow. The small talk that once felt effortless now drains you like a slow leak. You might be surrounded by people who adore the version of you they've always known, but inside you feel like an actor who's forgotten which lines are the script and which belong to the soul. That's not depression. That's the psyche beginning to reject a life that was assembled for survival, not for truth. Many people panic at this stage. They mistake the discomfort for ingratitude or self-sabotage. So they double down. They try to perfect the mask even further, more accolades, more performance, more exhausting upkeep of the image, hoping the familiarity will silence the inner revolt. But Jung's insight cuts deeper. He saw that a psychological crisis isn't always evidence you're failing. Sometimes it's the first evidence that your authentic self is finally strong enough to rebel against the counterfeit one. Let me give you an image. Imagine a man named Elias, an engineer everyone described as unshakably competent. He'd built a reputation on being the calm center of every chaos, rational, dependable, never too emotional. For 20 years that identity served him. But in his early 40s, he began noticing something strange. After even small social interactions, he felt an exhaustion so profound it was almost cellular. He'd sit in his car after work, hand on the ignition, and feel an inexplicable grief, as if he'd been holding his breath for decades, and only now realized his lungs were screaming for air. Nothing had collapsed. He just no longer fit inside the shape of himself. That moment when the old persona becomes too tight to inhabit is the psychological equivalent of a seed cracking open underground. It looks like destruction. It's actually the prelude to growth. And here's the cruel paradox. The soul does not want a more impressive mask. It wants permission to stop wearing one entirely. The sensation that you can't sustain your old personality anymore isn't your life falling apart. It's the first signal that your real life is pushing through the shell. But what follows next is rarely the sunrise people pray for. When the old identity fractures, you don't instantly land in a new, radiant self. More often, you plunge into a long, disorienting darkness, where every familiar compass spins uselessly. Chapter 2. The night sea journey. Descending into an invisible darkness. The psyche doesn't shift because happiness left. It shifts because a meaning that once sustained you has quietly died, and you've become too exhausted to keep resuscitating a corpse. The night sea journey begins in that exhaustion, not a dramatic collapse, but a slow withdrawal of inner light, like the gradual dimming of a room when the sun sets imperceptibly behind a winter cloud. Everything remains in place. The furniture of your life stands exactly where it always stood, yet the warmth that made it feel alive has simply vanished. Outwardly, you might function with surgical precision, but inwardly, consciousness begins to drift from its old moorings. Ancient civilizations across the globe mapped this experience through startlingly similar imagery. The descent to the underworld, the crossing of the midnight sea, the dark night of the soul. In Mesopotamian myth, Gilgamesh wandered through absolute darkness, searching for meaning. In Greek tradition, Orpheus descended into Hades for love. And in the alchemical tradition that fascinated Jung so deeply, the stage of Nigredo, the blackening, was seen not as failure, but as the mandatory precursor to any real transformation. The unconscious, across millennia, has always whispered the same truth. Before a new self can breathe, the old consciousness must travel through a darkness where every familiar form of direction becomes useless. And that is precisely what makes this stage so terrifying to the modern mind. We are raised on a mythology of clarity. We're taught that a well-lived life should feel purposeful, motivated, and certain. But the reality of psychological depth is far stranger. There are genuine developmental phases that don't resemble illumination. They resemble disorientation. Not because the psyche is dying, but because the container of who you were can no longer hold the person you're being reshaped into. During this passage, many people report that the things which once thrilled them become emotionally mute. Goals that once held enormous gravity suddenly float weightlessly, as if the internal magnet has reversed its charge. But the most unsettling part Isn't sadness sadness at least carries an object, a storyline? It's emptiness, a hollow cavern where something vibrant used to live. It's as if a layer of the soul has gone silent, and you're left listening to the echo of your own breathing, waiting for a signal that doesn't come. Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." The expansion of awareness has never been a comfortable endeavor, because consciousness doesn't just accumulate more light, it grows by enlarging its capacity to hold darkness. That's a sentence that should be carved into the architecture of every therapist's office. Because we live in a culture that pathologizes confusion, we treat every stretch of not knowing as a glitch to be fixed with a productivity hack or a gratitude journal. Yet sometimes that very mental fog is evidence that you're finally separating from a self that was too small to contain you. Just as the eyes must adjust to darkness before they can discern the stars, the soul may require a season of inner blindness before it can recognize what truly matters. I recall the story of a woman named Lena, a physician who'd spent her entire adult life following a perfectly calibrated track: medical school, residency, prestigious fellowship. From any external angle, she was a monument of achievement. But during a solitary evening in her clinic, after the last patient had gone, she looked down at her hands, these hands that had healed so many, and felt an overwhelming sense of exile. Not burnout, not fatigue, the chilling recognition that her soul had migrated away from this life long before her mind had updated the map. She was still there, but the meaning had evaporated. That delay between soul and consciousness is the essence of the night sea journey. The deepest part of us always moves first, like a root sensing water beneath concrete. Meanwhile, the ego scrambles to preserve the old rhythm, terrified of the void ahead, and so we enter a peculiar liminal state, no longer fully tethered to the old identity, yet not yet reborn into a new one. In depth psychology, this threshold is sacred, and every threshold carries the nature of ambiguity. People in this stage often describe a sensation of living at the bottom of a deep ocean. The sounds of the world still reach them, but muffled. Ordinary pleasures can't penetrate the inner silence. Even time warps. Days pass externally, but internally they feel suspended in a thick, unmoving present. It looks like stagnation, but looked at through the lens of transformation, this is not pathology, it's an ancient rite of passage. Traditional cultures intentionally sent initiates into forests, deserts, or darkness not to punish them, but because the old identity needed to dissolve in isolation before a new consciousness could be born. The modern soul undergoes the identical process, just without ceremony or elders to hold the space. Here is the paradox that saves lives. While you're in the night sea journey, you will likely believe you are losing your way entirely. But in Jungian terms, it may be the first time your deeper psyche has moved in alignment with your genuine path. The disorientation isn't a mistake, it's a recalibration. If you felt that strange, incommunicable drift, the quiet severing of an old self from a life you could no longer fully inhabit, then perhaps this recognition can serve as a handhold. You weren't lost the way you feared. You were passing through the chamber where the soul must walk in darkness before it can finally recognize its own path. And it's precisely there, in that darkness, that something else begins to rise. Not just emptiness. The parts of you that were buried decades ago start knocking on the floorboards. Chapter 3. Shadow Confrontation, the return of what you exiled. Do you realize this? The more meticulously the ego constructs its public image of who it is, the more obsessively the unconscious preserves the fragments that consciousness refuses to own. That is why genuine psychological transformation has never been a one-way journey toward the light. At a far deeper level, it is an encounter with everything you've spent a lifetime pushing out of awareness. Carl Jung called this hidden continent the shadow. Not an evil twin, not a demon, though popular psychology often distorts it that way, but simply the sum of every part of yourself that was incompatible with the story you needed to believe about who you are. No infant is born with a shadow. It is formed through necessity, through adaptation. A child whose wild, boisterous joy irritates a depressed parent learns to become quiet. A teenager whose anger was never allowed to be expressed becomes exquisitely polite, while the rage sinks underground. A person loved only for their self-sacrifice gradually learns to bury every personal need, because preserving the image of good felt like survival. Over time, those exiled parts don't vanish. They withdraw into the deep psyche, where they continue to shape your life from behind a curtain you can't see through. Jung's most frightening insight wasn't about gods or myths, it was this: until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's not metaphor, that's a precise diagnostic. What you repress doesn't lie dormant. It seeks return through your moods, your relationship patterns, your inexplicable overreactions, and the recurring conflicts you're convinced originate from outside yourself. This is why the person who tirelessly performs calmness often harbors a subterranean fury they can't acknowledge. The individual who builds an identity around moral superiority may become unusually cruel toward the mistakes of others, because those mistakes carry the shadow of their own disowned imperfection. The one who always sees themselves as a victim might, without any conscious awareness, be manipulating the emotions of everyone around them. In more cases than we'd like to admit, the trait we despise most intensely in another human being is the very attribute we've refused to integrate within ourselves. Jung was deeply fascinated by projection because he understood the shadow rarely arrives as introspection. It arrives disguised as other people. A man incapable of facing his own vulnerability feels visceral irritation whenever someone else expresses sadness. A woman who's denied her ambition for power automatically labels others as domineering or selfish. The psyche, brilliant in its defense mechanisms, hurls the shadow outward so the ego can maintain its fragile image of purity. But shadow confrontation cannot be bypassed if you want a whole life. At its core, this stage is the collapse of the illusion you've maintained about yourself. You start to realize you are not identical to the sanitized Ursum your consciousness has been repeating. Beneath the socially approved identity lies something far more primal: instinct, envy, the hunger for power, the terror of abandonment, repressed anger alive like magma beneath a thin crust. Most of the time, consciousness strolls on that crust assuming the ground is solid. But the deeper the transformation, the more cracks appear, and what seeps up can terrify you. Many people are shocked by their own reactions during this phase. They don't understand why emotions they swore didn't belong to them suddenly erupt. A generous person feels an ugly twinge of schadenfreude at a friend's failure. A forgiving person discovers a reservoir of resentment toward a parent they believed they'd long since released. Some feel a reckless, almost primal urge to demolish every structure that once kept them safe: the career, the relationship, the reputation, just to breathe. What frightens them isn't just the feeling, it's the shattering of the tidy narrative they'd built about who they are. Ancient myths encoded this ordeal perfectly. The hero's journey almost always involves a direct confrontation with a monster, a dragon, a leviathan, a forbidden forest. Jung didn't see these as decorative fictions. In the language of the collective unconscious, monsters symbolize the repressed instinctual forces the conscious mind fears most. The hero doesn't mature by slaying the external beast, but by becoming capable of entering their own darkness without flinching. That's the precise difference between repression and maturity. Repression distorts the shadow and makes it more dangerous. Maturity is the capacity to see the darkness within yourself and not let it drive the car unconsciously. A person who knows they are capable of anger is far less dangerous than someone convinced they've never been angry at all. Someone who can admit their capacity for selfishness is often more trustworthy than someone desperately curating an image of moral perfection. Because the most lethal part of the psyche isn't the darkness we see, it's the darkness that operates entirely outside our awareness, masquerading as righteousness. This is why individuation cannot happen without shadow work. Wholeness isn't a collection of only the pretty parts. It's the terrifying, liberating ability to contain your contradictions, your kindness and your cruelty, your courage and your cowardice, your love and your hidden hatreds. Consciousness loves to sort reality into binaries: good, bad, light, dark, noble, shameful, but the soul is an ecosystem, not a courtroom. Maturity doesn't mean becoming a perfect person. It means becoming an authentic one, fully honest with the entire structural truth of your inner world. But here's what no one warns you about. As the shadow becomes integrated and the self grows more authentic, your external world shifts seismically. Many of the relationships that were built around your old false self cannot survive the person you're becoming, and that is its own kind of grief. Chapter 4: Isolation, Loss, and the Death of Artificial Relationships. The most profound losses in a human life often begin without a single dramatic event. No slammed doors, no betrayal, just a quiet, steady withdrawal of connection. A conversation that used to flow for hours now feels like dragging furniture across a floor. A bond that once made you feel understood now leaves a strange, heavy distance in the air. Even places that used to cradle you start to feel like rooms you've already left, even while your body still sits inside them. What's unsettling is that this transformation starts long before your rational mind can articulate it. In Jungian psychology, the term libido doesn't simply carry the narrow sexual meaning it acquired in popular culture. Jung used it to describe the totality of your psychic energy, the life force you invest into relationships, goals, beliefs, roles, and your sense of belonging. So when a person enters deep psychological transformation, the first shift isn't usually an outward event. It's an inward reallocation of that energy. Where it once flowed toward certain people and pursuits, it now begins to withdraw. And that's why this stage hurts so much. You're not merely attached to people through emotion. You're attached through the version of yourself that exists inside those relationships. A woman remains in a decades-long friendship, not just because of the other person, but because of the familiar feeling of who she is around them. A man stays inside an outdated environment, not because it makes him happy, but because it spares him from confronting the terrifying question: who would I become if I stepped outside everything I've ever known? So when libido starts draining from old psychological structures, you don't just lose a person or a place. It feels as if a piece of your old identity is quietly dying alongside them. Many people in this stage try to rescue everything through sheer willpower. They tell themselves they're just tired, too sensitive, that if they try harder, the old sense of connection will return. But psychic energy doesn't obey forced enthusiasm. Libido always moves toward where the soul senses the possibility of growth, and slowly recedes from what persists only as emotional habit. Some relationships don't end on the day you say goodbye. They ended long before, in the silent moment when your inner self stopped being genuinely present. Jung once wrote something that should make us all pause. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. Many connections exist not because of love or true resonance, but because they help people avoid the emptiness inside. Some fill their calendars with endless social noise, not out of genuine closeness, but because the constant presence of others prevents them from sitting alone with their own interior world. Some relationships continue simply because both individuals fear solitude more than they actually belong together. Profound psychological transformation is therefore often accompanied by a season of specific, necessary isolation. You begin to notice which conversations leave you exhausted rather than understood, which environments demand you shrink yourself to fit in, which relationships orbit around a version of you that no longer exists. This explains why people in deep inner change often feel their lives becoming less crowded, not because they've become cold or arrogant, but because the maturing psyche becomes ruthlessly selective about where it invests its life force. Libido no longer flows into connections sustained only by obligation, familiarity, or fear of being alone. It starts seeking depth, authenticity, and genuine soul resonance. Look at nature. Autumn doesn't damage the tree. It compels the tree to stop feeding leaves that are no longer necessary for the coming season. From the outside, falling leaves always look like loss, but at a deeper ecological level, they are an act of preserving life. The human psyche sometimes functions the same way. Before you can enter a new phase of life, your soul may need to withdraw energy from connections that have already fulfilled their role in your growth. The isolation isn't punishment. It's a transitional space where you learn to exist without constantly clutching relationships that no longer reflect your true self. If you've walked through this, felt a relationship slowly turn unfamiliar without any fight or betrayal, then you already understand that the deepest pain isn't always being abandoned by someone else. Sometimes it's the quiet, devastating moment when your soul realizes, this place no longer belongs to me. And after all that dissolution, all that loss, what remains isn't a diminished person. It's a self that has finally begun to live without perpetually abandoning itself. And that's the ground from which genuine rebirth emerges. Chapter 5, the rebirth stage, becoming who you were always meant to be. This is the stage Jung spent a lifetime mapping. Individuation. After the persona has cracked, after the descent into the dark sea, after the confrontation with the shadow, and the necessary withdrawal from hollow connections, a person gradually enters a fundamentally different quality of inner existence. Many imagine rebirth as explosive fireworks, ecstasy, radical transformation. But in reality, its first sign is often a strange, quiet peace. The peace that materializes when you finally stop warring with yourself. You no longer exhaust your energy managing how others perceive you. You're no longer living inside a constant grinding performance of worthiness, desperate to prove your right to exist. A deep stillness begins to settle, like the earth finally ceasing to tremble after a quake that lasted decades. Jung's famous line, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are," can only be fully understood when you realize that becoming yourself has never been a comfortable journey. Because most of us were not raised to live authentically. We were raised to adapt, to please, to survive inside collective structures without causing disruption. And so at some point, many people look at a life that was built beautifully, completely, yet realize their soul is nowhere reflected in the architecture. Individuation begins precisely there. In ancient alchemy, a field Jung studied deeply, gold wasn't created by adding something new to the base metal. It was created by gradually removing the impurities that obscured its true essence. Jung saw this as the perfect symbol for the human psychological process. At its deepest level, individuation isn't the process of becoming someone else. It's the slow, sacred process of stripping away every false identity, so your most primordial self can emerge again. That's why people who pass through this transformation often feel less like they're moving forward and more like they're finally coming home. An inner compass begins to form. You can sense what genuinely aligns with your soul versus what merely conforms to collective expectations. You stop living through old psychological reflexes. In the past, rejection might have sent you spiraling into self-doubt for days. Someone's judgment might have hijacked your inner peace. But after traversing the inner reconstruction, you gradually understand that the value of your existence can no longer be entirely outsourced to the external world. This doesn't make you cold or disconnected from humanity. On the contrary, you often become more sincere, more present, more profound in your relationships, because for the first time you're not spending enormous amounts of energy maintaining an image. You can say no without drowning in guilt. You can remain silent without fearing misunderstanding. You can walk away from what no longer aligns without turning every departure into a war. This is a very different kind of freedom from the one the world usually celebrates. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but freedom from the constant compulsion to become whatever others expect. In nature, trees don't try to become another species to be accepted by the forest. Rivers don't change direction simply because the earth wishes them to flow elsewhere. Only human beings spend years abandoning their true nature in exchange for belonging. And perhaps that's why the journey back to the self is always both painful and sacred. Here is the most beautiful and difficult truth of inner rebirth. People eventually realize that what they were searching for their entire life wasn't really success, admiration, or status in the eyes of the world. What the soul was secretly searching for all along was simply the permission to exist as itself, without shame, without fear, and without needing anyone else's authorization. And perhaps that is the exact moment a human life truly begins changing forever. Conclusion: the final psychological stage before a life changes permanently isn't the moment you become stronger. It's the moment you can no longer continue being your former self. Everything familiar begins to lose its gravitational pull. The values that once sustained you slowly become foreign. And beneath all those silent subterranean shifts, another self is quietly being assembled in the dark. Carl Jung believed the human soul is always, relentlessly, moving toward wholeness even when the process forces you through the most painful seasons.